Welcome to Coming from Left Field, where we have conversations about politics, books, and current events with your host, Greg Godels and Pat Cummings. Three years ago, in 2020, the world was a dumpster fire. George Floyd was killed, COVID was wreaking a global genocide, everyone was in lockdown, and Trump lost the election but had no intentions of conceding. But the worst thing that happened was my father-in-law, Chuck Holmes, died. At the funeral, I met Greg. We hit it off, corresponded, shared books, and connected with Zoom meetings. From the ashes rise the phoenix. We decided to start a podcast, Coming from Left Field. Let's discuss. Greg, how you doing?
Hey Pat, how are you?
We are gathered here. This is going to be good. Hey,
Something different.
We've both been really busy lately. Both caring for elderly people. You, your sister, and me, my mother-in-law, and haven't had a podcast in a while. And I thought, it's been almost 3 years since we had our podcast, since our podcast started. And looking back at all of the guests we've had, 68 guests, where this is podcast 69.
Amazing.
I thought let's just chat about how what we think about the podcast, where we've been, where we're going, what we like about it, where we disagree, and maybe end up with some general politics after that. How about that?
Sounds good. Let's do it.
Hey, do you remember our very first podcast?
Yeah, I think I do. Yes, How Democracies Die.
Okay.
It was contentious from the beginning.
Okay.
Probably the most contentious of all of our broadcasts.
But I love it because it exemplifies, I think, some of our foundational differences in how we view the world. So let's do a quick summary of the book. It's two academics who looked at democracies that failed and what did they have in common that made them fail. And it's things like having lack of deference in political in a political dialogue, losing institutions. It's kind of a precursor to Trump. Let's see
it's a postcursor. It's a postcursor. That's what I object to it so much. It's written around Trumpism. So let's come up with a theory. Let's create a theory for the masses of how we got here, based upon our liberal presumptions.
Okay,
and that's what I rejected from the get-go with that book. And also, it's academics, and there's a certain patronizing tone to the whole book, in my view. Looks down your nose at the rest of us and says, "Look, we examined all these failed democracies. They don't even define democracy in any accurate or interesting way, and then they come up with some superficial answers that just happen to fit our moment in their own minds."
So there you go. I thought the book was fantastic. I thought it was great.
Why?
I thought it
laid everything
out.
Tell me why.
Well, and as we discussed that book, one of your issues was, but look a little deeper. I'm not sure we really have a democracy. I'm not sure that we are functioning politically correct. We're desperately trying to save this institution. I'm not sure this institution is worth saving. And that's kind of your spin on a lot of things. You look a little bit deeper than the kind of the surface area. And anyway, that's it. Do you,
Well,
you
you
agree with
know, what I really reject is exploiting the fact that all of us took civics in high school, and they give us a high school civics concept of our democracy, just the way it's taught you as a kid, which is essentially a loyalty program. I mean, forget about it. It's not historical. It doesn't have a 2 sides or 3 sides or 4 sides, or the disputes that created this country, the existing differences, class differences, social differences, and so on. It is a simplification designed to make you loyal.
Right.
And they take that and they say, that's our democracy. And they know better. I mean, that's probably what I resent is they're academics. They've been educated. They certainly know better. It's not that simple. But then they present this little little handbook on how we're going to save ourselves from Trumpism.
Right.
Well,
right,
that's not the way the world works.
right. Right.
And we're going to get Trump again. I mean, if you think about it, we're going to get Trump again. I mean,
Right.
today's news is that all the young people have turned against Biden because of the war on the Palestinians.
Well, look at the related to that topic. Look what happened in Argentina when they interviewed all of the people who put that kind of Trump guy in Argentina. And they said, I disagree with his opinion on the environment. I disagree with his opinion on gays. But I'm so pissed off that I've had it. And I think we're kind of at that phase, being so pissed off we've had it. And so,
Well,
yeah,
use a metaphor. I mean, it's like a kid that's been living at home and been tortured by their parents. I mean, metaphorically, figuratively, and they want to get away, and they're just fed up with hearing the same old thing and doing the same old thing, and your life is planned by your parents, and you want to get away. And then, like our two Princeton academics, you're lectured on how good you have it. This is how good you have it. Well, people don't feel like they have it good in Argentina. They don't feel like they have it good in this country. They don't feel like they have it good in UK or in Germany or in Serbia today. They had the latest election results. So instead of drawing your science from that, what do these countries have in common? What they have in common is they're pissed off. And go and find out why they're pissed off. Don't defend, the mom and dad
yeah, yeah.
for the way they raised their children.
Hey, let's talk about how we started our podcast. My father-in-law, Chuck Holmes, who's married to your sister, um, died in May or so, right in the middle of the pandemic 3 years ago. And
2000.
Paul and I made a pilgrimage back to Central Illinois from Washington. We drove our our trailer, because we were so nervous about flying with the pandemic. It was the middle of the pandemic. And we had a chance to spend, I don't know, 3-4 days there. And golly, I enjoyed your company, and we enjoyed chatting.
Likewise.
And I remember I had never met you because I don't think you wanted to kind of come when I was around with my father-in-law, who was very nice man, a lovely fellow, but really kind of foundationally a John Bircher. Is that too harsh? He's very conservative,
Well,
very.
he might have been beyond Trump. I'm not sure.
I it,
But
I
here's
think so.
let me tell a funny story about you, because you were persistent in sending him books which had at least a centrist or slightly left wing slant to it, to try to get him to think
Right.
beyond that little bubble that he lived in. And I would get there, and there would be the books unread, and he'd try to give them to me because he wasn't reading them. So I did get some of your books through Chuck, but yeah, he was politically kind of a Neanderthal.
I know that was interesting, and he commented once. He said you were very, 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 very liberal. I asked him about you, and he said, well, Greg is a communist. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Everybody's a communist according to Chuck. He's so right wing. And on the plane ride home from one of my visits, I Googled your name, and lo and behold, you are a prolific author for Marxist Leninists Today, and you are very much of a kind of a academic and related to that whole era of 1930s beyond. And I remember reading an article you wrote about Coltrane and some other things, and just really kind of fell in love with you and how much we had in common. I thought we were extremely different, but at least we could have good conversations.
Yeah,
And
I think we well represent the left. We call this podcast, it's important to note that it's called Coming from Left Field, where the presumption is that both of us are of the left. But I think you're to the right of the left, I mean, in the left spectrum, and I'm to the left of the left in the left spectrum. so we can get along, we can talk to people, we can have guests on of different views. I think all of our guests you'd probably identify in a generic broad way as left.
Right.
We don't slip into the other folks, but they fit along that spectrum, and we all get along, and we're civil, and but we're passionate, we are impassioned, and we differ. And I
Right.
think that's something the left would benefit from doing more.
Right. Well, I met your lovely daughter and her boyfriend at the funeral too. She's a social worker. I didn't meet your other daughter. Lives in North Carolina. Is that correct?
North Carolina, yes.
North Carolina. And unfortunately, maybe 4 or 5 months after we met, your wife died.
Yes,
Had been
she
sick for a
died,
while.
yes, in August, and Chuck died in May or June.
Right.
So they were very close together. Yeah.
And we corresponded and called, and this is pandemic time, so we'd do Zoom meetings, and we started to swap books, and you read the books. And this is funny, but this goes again to, I think, our differences. I sent you the Hillbilly Elegy book by whatever it is,
Well, I
JD.
stopped you before you sent it because I'd already read it, or I'd already done a review. I sent you the review I did of the book,
Right.
and it was a different spin than the
And
one you
sent
had.
me another book, which was a criticism, an academic criticism of how full of crap this guy was. And I read it, and one thing I'll say about myself is that I have a tendency to kind of change my opinion, and I completely changed my opinion and realized that I was an idiot for being sucked into this story about this poor guy making it to Yale, and I didn't look at all of the other circumstances that surrounded his life that were more important. Were more important, and that's happened a couple of times. So in around December or so, after sharing books and articles, and I'm following your blog and so forth, I said, let's do a podcast. And you said, I don't think I've ever listened to a podcast. You want to do a podcast, fine, but I don't know, you
Well,
write,
I must add, Pat, that you really kept it going because of your technical knowledge and your persistence and your willingness to do a lot of the shit work that is necessary to keep something like this going.
Right.
I've been a kind of a free rider in some ways. I feel guilty about it, but it's a tribute to your acumen and your drive that you've kept this going, and it's grown. I mean, it's really grown smartly.
Yeah.
So it has a decent following now, and
you'll do a YouTube video. You'll watch a lecture. You're not all nose in the book. I mean, you've transformed a little bit, haven't you?
Not really. Not really. I watched the video you sent me a few days ago. I watched the first part of it. Well worth watching the first part of it, but I couldn't watch the whole thing.
Yeah.
Like
And I think
5 minutes,
the funniest thing is that I do a video intro to all these things. Just try to, I don't know, they're not very good, but they're just trying to that's part of what we've done from the beginning. And I remember mentioning this to you last year. I said, yeah, I did this, intro or whatever. And you said, what are you talking about? And I realized that you've never watched one of our podcasts, which I think is a testament to you, to you all. There you go. So that's it. So that was How Democracies Die. And then we did a couple of other books. We had your buddy, Dan Kovalik, on for
many times.
Book on cancel culture. And then he did a series on the pink tide in Central America. And most recently went to Kosovo. I love Dan. He's,
well, he just came back from Cairo. He was trying to get into Gaza with a group and he never got in. But he may have got to the West Bank. I don't know, but he's back, and we ought to have him on again to talk about, because there's no one else out there talking about being there or trying to be there in a way. He's the Jack Reed of our time. he giggles when I call him that, but John Reed was a guy that went to Russia during the Bolshevik Revolution and wrote the classic textbook On the Scene. And he also did Insurgent Mexico, which was right on the scene of the Mexican Revolution. So Dan's a bit like Jack Reed. He tries to get wherever the action is. And so he's always good to have. I mean, he can talk firsthand about stuff.
Well,
I don't always agree with his take on these countries. For example, I think he's been to Iran and other places. He kind of overlooks the theocracy. I mean, if you're going to talk about Israel in a demonic way, it's a problematic country because it's theocratic, then you can't just ignore that Iran is a theocratic country. You've got to be consistent in that. You can't romanticize one theocracy and not the other.
right.
So we have our differences, but in general, Dan's a great guy. And he's a real humanist. I mean, he really cares about people deeply, profoundly.
And he lives close to you, right?
Yeah, he's moved to downtown Pittsburgh. I live in the East End, so we're 10 minutes, 15 minutes apart.
Okay,
get
so you
together
can have a cup of
frequently.
coffee, glass of wine, have lunch,
Lots of
and
wine, yeah, lots of wine. That's what we really do.
Okay.
That's our lubrication.
well, our other episode number 4 was Karl Marx, and I read a lot of Karl Marx I never had before. I read the Communist Manifesto and good portions of Das Kapital and all the, you know, I really grew to appreciate through multiple shows that we've talked about Karl Marx what a remarkable person he is and how much he has to say about what's going on right now. I'm
Yeah,
glad that I was introduced to him. It was a
he's a
caricature.
systematic
He went from caricature to truly a person that one should spend time studying. And I don't know, what are your thoughts?
Well, two things. One, he's independent. I mean, he wasn't confined by an academic career. Problem with most academic Marxists is that they're confined by the pressures that come to produce in a particular way. You can step outside the mainstream, but not too far. Marx never had that constriction. He was able to study and go where it took him. Two, he was systematic. So he came up with a worldview that was not just a minutia, like most academics today. That, well, I'm a specialist in this small province of Albania. No. Marx thought globally. He thought systemically. He thought about the way economics, sociology, psychology all fit together. So that's kind of a lost thing. And it's particularly lost in the United States. In Europe, it's still alive. There's still people looking for grand thinkers. But here, it's a very, very steep climb to introduce people to Marxism. It's a very, very steep climb to get them to think in a global way. I mean, I just had an article that I posted, got one of the smallest hits of anything I've written in a long time. It's a fairly long piece. I think it was quite good. It gets picked up in the UK with the largest circulation socialist-oriented newspaper in North America or UK. It gets picked up in Italy and translated. It gets picked up, but here, I think apart from one website, nothing. And that's kind of typical in this country because people obviously are caught up now in Gaza, and they should be. But like Marx, you've got to be a bigger thinker than that. You've got to see how Gaza fits in. What's the connection between Gaza and the war in Ukraine? What's the connection between the two sides, the way they're shaping up? What's the rest of the world think about it? This would be Marxist thinking, but not in the United States. It's just a question of, my God, they're slaughtering people over there. Well, that's true, but that's not going to get you into something deeper, something with a more lasting effect. Look at Occupy. What are the residuals of Occupy? Pat, I mean, you followed Occupy. What are the residuals? What did we gain from Occupy that we can say we made a step forward?
Slogans. I mean, there were
what
so
have we
many.
gained from Black Lives Matter?
What did we
does
gain
Black
from
Lives Matter
Bernie?
give
What
us?
did we gain? That's part of the frustration, and I think that's
It's my
foundationally
frustration
where you
too.
get so pissed off about things, is that it's one thing to talk, it's another thing to actually organize and move people, and we're not doing that. You
I
know,
try to finish my articles with, not a program. I don't make programs. I'm just a person. I'm not a political party, but at least something programmatic, something that says this is what we need. This is where we should go. This is what we should reject. But unfortunately, that's not really happening. As I mentioned to you earlier, we get these how articles, these how books, how the right twisted Supreme Court, how the right twisted our educational system, how the right, or vice versa, how the left twisted it. They get you nowhere. They just get the authors popular and they make a lot of money. And that's as
right.
far as it goes.
The other Marx book we did, we had The Last Years of Marx. We both read the book by Marcelo Musto, who was a
Musto,
French
yeah.
academic, really probably the most prominent scholar on Marx. And he wrote us a very nice letter back that saying, I can't really, do your podcast, but thank you very much. So we ended up hooking up with a guy from Midwest Marx, Carlos Garrido, and he and Eddie have a very good podcast in the Midwest, looking at they're both are both philosophy major philosophers, I guess. They're actively in school now or finishing up their PhD. And that's how we got to meet them. What do you think about Eddie and Carlos? Wasn't that a good
Well,
find?
it's exciting. I mean, it's exciting for me as an old coot to see young people that are picking up on Marx, and it's generating a bunch of excitement, and they are generating a bunch of excitement, all to the good. I think they're really positive. I think where they're advantaged over other quote unquote young Marxists is that they defer to some extent. They reach back into the past. They've studied some of their antecedents, some of the people that came before them. I think they need to study them a little more. They need to dig a little deeper. They need to build they're building a following, but maybe too fast, maybe too quickly. They need to spend a little more time and dig in. But I'm very much impressed with them. They excite me. They're one of the developments that I think really encourage me going forward at a time when I'm not very encouraged about much.
Right.
Did you like them?
We had Eddie
Like their
Smith
energy?
on. Pardon me?
Did you like their energy? I mean, I thought their energy was
I watch their podcast all the time. And I always send them a couple of bucks. They're Eddie Smith, we had him on to discuss Michael Parenti's book, Blackshirts.
Yes.
I think somehow you ended up saying that was one of the best books that kind of introduced you to your, I don't know, how you sent it to me. You sent it to me a long time ago. I finally read it and just was blown away of how much I love Michael Parenti.
If I'm critical of many people. I'm just critical of the two youngsters. I think they're great, but they're things they need to learn. But if it comes to anyone I'm not critical of, and I absolutely admire, unreservedly admire and appreciate the work he did, it's Michael Parenti, who I understand is on an age and not doing much work, but his entire opus outside of the university. He actually was my alma mater, my undergraduate alma mater, University of Illinois during the 60s, causing quite a story. He's quite an activist. He wasn't just an academic. But once he got his PhD, he really never got any positions academically because of his politics. And yet his politics are so brilliant, and he's such a great expositor. He reaches people without deferring, without patronizing. He speaks directly to them in a language that people understand. And his understanding of Marxism is so clear. And so, I mean, I urge anyone listening, Google Michael Parenti. There are videos of him. He's a brilliant speaker. Watch them all. I have friends that watch him over and over again. Instead of Humphrey Bogart, they watch Michael Parenti and read his books, because even Julius Caesar, his book on Julius Caesar is a terrific book. So I'm happy to see these youngsters are reading Parenti. Yeah, that's wonderful.
Well, you could tell the Midwest Marx, they cut their teeth on them. They're that's for sure. And we were lucky enough to get his son on, Christian Parenti, who wrote an article. I think you sent it to me, The First Privilege Walk, which is kind of looking at the beginnings of our political woke, you know, politics. And he also wrote a book called Hamilton. So I, read him. I liked him. I mean, I know you got in a little huffy puffy with him about something. Some
Mhm.
disagreement
Yeah.
about, I don't know, something. I can't even remember what it was,
Well,
but
I should
he's
yeah,
he is
I should
truly,
apologize because I
huh?
have expect so much from him because of his father, and
Yeah.
I don't think I got from him, and that's not fair to hold him by that standards. But no, I thought his article that he wrote featured Erica Sharover, who was a brief assistant professor at my graduate school. I went in philosophy. She was a assistant professor who had to read a paper for tenure, and she was turned down. So I had familiarity with Sharover, and she was the basis of this cult-like whole thing that he identifies as one of the origins of wokeism. And so I thought that part was very good. I'm not so interested in Hamilton and a rescue of Hamilton, which is essentially what I think his book does, is try to make Hamilton into something he's not. But nevertheless, it was an interesting and fun podcast.
And he recently was on with Norm
Finkelstein.
Finkelstein. He and Norm did I think I sent you a link to that, and
Yes.
I'm really looking forward to his future work. We had poets on. We had my sister and a poet, Kevin Miller, and then another friend.
She's
And
the
that was so,
talented part of your family. That's where all the talent went, into your sister.
she's the, well, she's smart lady, that's for sure. But what's so funny is that when we had her on, I think she didn't think that she was really a poet. And in the subsequent couple of years, she's writing and publishing, and now she knows she's a poet.
That's exciting. That's really
And
exciting.
Kevin
Can
Miller
we
is one
take
of my,
credit? Can we take credit for giving her
I
some
don't know.
exposure
Both
or
those
some?
guys are, I could have them on every other week. It just amazes me when I have them on how powerful poetry is in shaping people's thoughts and putting them in the right way. I'd rather have poetry than religion any day. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, that's not my muse, but I agree. I'd rather have that than religion. I'm an admirer of Bertolt Brecht and his poetry. I'm an admirer of Pablo Neruda and a few others, but they're driven by my politics. So what can I say? I'm really not I'm a bit of a ignoramus when it comes to poetry, but I enjoyed it. I enjoyed having them on.
Yeah,
I'm
we
glad
should
it was
have them on
successful.
again. They were wonderful. Hey, you turned me on to this guy in our podcast number 11, and
Sure,
that was
Gowans, yeah.
Stephen Gowans. And we've had,
A brilliant mind, really a brilliant mind. Not well known, but brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
so how did you know him? He's a blogger out of Canada, right?
Actually, when I started blogging maybe 20 years ago, we got in a pissing match, which I'd sort of forgotten about, but he took me to task over something. He was wrong, of course, and I was right. But anyway, but I remember how intelligent, I always remembered that. And then I started reading some of his stuff, and it really is very, very close to my thinking on so many issues. And I see him as a kindred spirit. He's very articulate. I don't think he has all the academic credentials maybe that some of the others had, but as in terms of being a brilliant mind and being incisive and deep, he is that. And, the irony is that he was arguing, which I totally agreed with, that Israel was kind of like the policeman of the Middle West for the United States. And I think he's absolutely right. But when you look at it today, in retrospect, the tail is wagging the dog. I mean,
Right.
Biden's sending people over begging Netanyahu, don't kill all these people. It's going to make me lose the election. Don't kill all these people. Internationally, we're losing ground. We were losing Saudi Arabia, et cetera, et cetera. But the bloodlust is there. They just continue to kill. But
Well,
I'm sure that if we had Stephen on again, he would agree.
I was at the gym, and every couple of days I'll just walk 3 or 4 miles and put my headphones on, and I re-listened to his Israel Beachhead in the Middle East, which was episode 11. He's right on the money, and in
Oh, yeah.
saying that this is kind of there are policemen in this area. They're making sure that our interests are being taken care of. And now you're right, in a way, they're now dictating to us as opposed to,
Yeah. Well, just a moment. That's Netanyahu. That particular regime in Israel. They don't
Right.
care. I mean, they're driven by, again, it's a theocratic regime. They're driven by the Bible. I mean, it's
Right.
scary.
I have to admit, I have to mention my good friend Hollwedel, and
Yes, yes.
also my good friend Jim Painter. One is Jim Painter is my high school buddy that was a newspaper guy that we had on to look at the
From
press.
Arizona, am I wrong? Was it he was in Arizona?
He's in Arizona right now. He's on he's publishing on Facebook a picture a day of all the photographs that he took when he was a newspaper reporter, and they are just phenomenal pictures of, you know, Barry Goldwater and all of the migrant workers. And this is done with a camera. You know, he's flying in
Yeah.
crop duster planes. So I thought he was really foundationally set the stage for what's going on, what's right and wrong with the media, because he's seen the demise of it. And then my good friend Haas, I don't know. Haas probably votes Republican more than not.
Maybe.
And I swear when we sit and chat and talk and share books, we agree 90% of the time. He lives in the Midwest. He's smart as hell, a real good World War II historian. And we had him on number 13, Exterminate All the Brutes.
I remember that. Yes.
We were looking at the colonialism that occurred with that. And I think we had him on also to talk about the Union in Bessemer. I forget. Yeah, that we had him on
Amazon.
episode number 6, where we were talking about the Union vote in
Yeah.
Bessemer. So
Your fellow liberals, I mean, folks that belong to book clubs and go to cocktail parties, they would benefit from having the experience of sitting down with someone like him, because they'll find that he's very intelligent, which he is, very thoughtful, which he is, and he has a point of view, which he does.
correct.
And they would benefit, rather than dismissing everyone to the right of Trump, I guess. Everyone
Right.
everyone to the right of Biden. They should listen. They should have a conversation. They should talk.
Right.
There's a point of view, a perspective. Often it's one that they benefit from hearing.
Right. Hey, you turned me on to a couple of people. We always talk about this, the long, deep
Toni
grudge,
Gilpin.
because we give out a button to our guest that is from the Union that she talks about in that particular book, and that is Toni Gilpin. But there's a series of these people that we've had on. You had us on with the that are right about the history of the Communist Party or socialist movements back in the 30s, 40s. Roger Keeran, episode number 7, the labor history of the Communist Party. It was remarkable to see how important they were in shaping General Motors, shaping the unions. They were essentially the catalyst that
Yes,
pushed our. I had no idea about this history.
If my involvement does nothing else, it would be to make 2 points, and one is to bring forward through these guests the real history of the labor movement and the real history of the Black liberation movement. And of course, to understand that fully, you've got to take your Cold War blinders off and understand the role in the 30s and 40s and even into the 50s of the Communist Party. If you don't do that, you're dishonest. And I think all the guests that we had on that discussed jazz and African Americans, that discussed Henry Winston, that discussed
Right, that was episode 19, Toni
Toni Gilpin
Monterio with Henry Winston. I didn't know who Paul Robeson was. I don't know any of these people.
Right, and what I want people to understand is, they want to understand their history. If they want their history to be meaningful and direct them forward, they've got to understand that role. You can criticize it. You can say they were bad people or Stalin or what, even ran a rave, but please understand the leadership that was supplied by the Communist Party. The Communist Party and I think it was late 20s, held a public trial to expel a member because of a racist incident in the 20s. They did it on purpose. They did it publicly because they wanted to send a message about who they were and what they believed in, which led the country in essence. You can't put a number on the effects of that kind of an event. That's a small thing, the Scottsboro boys and so on. So our leaders would like us to think the civil rights movement began with Rosa Parks, with Martin Luther King. It didn't. Paul Robeson, Du Bois, and curiously, they all associated with the Communist Party. The great figures prior to that, because the Communist Party was the only political organization that had the guts to press those agendas for unionization and for the rights of Black people. And that has to be respected. And that's why I've pushed hard to have guests that could explain that on our podcast. And Roger Keeran did the UAW, the same UAW now that's pulling itself out of an incredible hole that it put itself in after anti-communism and McCarthyism and the Ruther administration. They weren't there. They were where they want to be back in the 20s and 30s, back in the 30s. So these are all great lessons, I think, for people to understand.
And just to jump around a little bit, I remember we asked Roger Keeran, that was episode number 7. Have you ever been discriminated or harmed because you wrote so much about the Communist Party? And he said, yes, and we had the same thing happen with Finkelstein, got purged. Same thing happened with Toni Monteiro, got, purged. A lot of these academics paid a price for trying to write about these topics, the topics themselves.
Well, to me, that's a measuring stick. If you're an academic, you better prove yourself by pissing people off. One of our guests, who I thought at the time was one of our better guests, one of our best guests, was Walter Johnson. I don't know a damn thing about him, but his book was extraordinary, a real eye opener for me, and that's one that you came up with, and I love. Well, he's on the firing line right now. That's the character of the man. The respect you draw from that book and from where he stood when he was on our podcast, I thought, this guy's special. And now at Harvard, he's the guy that's out in the yard telling people this is McCarthyism, what's going on with this attempt to shut people up because they're defending the rights of Palestinians. So, it kind of teaches you what happens if you do have integrity, if you do have fight, if you do have spirit and spunk, you're going to be pushed out. You're going to be pushed outward. Now, he's still at Harvard, but he's certainly
he is a remarkable historian when you look at his credentials and what he's written. And that gets to the process of how we go through this. Either I usually will read a book and then I'll chat with you and you'll get it on Kindle or whatever, and then we'll send the invitation out. And there's a lot of people that we've sent out invitations to that haven't come through. I mean, I'm looking at White Malice, that thick book about Africa. It's a variable reinforcement schedule. But occasionally when they'll say, yeah, we'll be on the show, it's just like, yes, this is, it's just such a treat to read something that you value and respect so much, and then have that person come on and respectfully give you an hour of the deep dive into what they did. And that was the way, that's the way Walter was. Walter Johnson was remarkable.
Absolutely. It's good. And that was your find. And look at the Europeans we've got some top-notch Europeans that have been on the show. We had to set schedules up to fit their time. We had Tariq Ali.
Tariq Ali was
very, very busy intellectual and quite good. We had Desayas, who was terrific. We had Professor Moncrief, who was one of the best ones I think we've done. I think her work is earth-shaking, though it's not really had the impact it should have.
Stop right there. She was the psychiatrist that you came across an obscure article posted in some Jacobin or something about Marxist theory related to mental health and depression, and
Right.
she is a critic of the overuse of antidepressants. One out of 20, one out of 4 people in England are on some kind of antidepressant. And she wrote this very obscure article in the Journal of Molecular Psychiatry that said, I'm not necessarily against prescribing antidepressants, but there is a relationship between these pharmaceutical companies and our society's malaise, and we don't look at the roots of what is causing the depression. We just say there's a pill for that. And I have followed her in a couple of recent lectures, and she's on fire. I mean, she is going through, still professing that we need to put a governor on these pharmaceutical companies for how they approach this. She was remarkable. Yeah.
I thought so, and to her Marxism came through in a subtle way, but
Right.
behind it all was this incredible research that she did, showing that, in fact, when you did a overall study of the effect of these drugs, they were not effective. It challenged their effectiveness. They didn't do what they were supposed to do. So she was saying, "Look, I'm not saying they're bad. I'm saying they don't do you any good."
Right.
And that got her really the publicity that she subsequently got. I was really impressed with her. She was quite good.
And yeah, and she was attacked. She was attacked by
Oh
all the
yeah,
media for.
absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, tell me about
How about
this. Yeah, I got one for you. You sent me a book, Black Liberation and the Red Scare. Was that Winston? Who was that?
no? That was
Ben Davis. Ben Davis.
yeah, Ben Davis. That was
In the Communist
Gerald Horne.
Party. And I wrote this professor, Gerald Horne, and said, would you mind being on our show? I read your book. I didn't know who this guy was. Is it an understatement to say that Gerald Horne is one of the coolest people you've ever met in your life?
Yeah, he is. Yeah,
He truly is. He truly is. And I didn't realize that he is considered one of our most prominent historians on Black History. The 1619 Project was a ripoff of some of his work. He writes a book a year, and he did the number 17. He also did Jazz and Justice, where he was the history of jazz. He was kind enough to come back and talk about that. He, I am at a loss for words about how much I respect this man. He's just remarkable.
Yeah, and he's a tenured professor, so he's secure. He's an academic, written, I mean, literally dozens and dozens of books. He is not afraid of Marxism. He defends the communists, like Ben Davis, like Paul Robeson, many others, African American communists in particular, over and over again. I mean, he has the definitive works, most of which is neglected and ignored. The one piece he did, the one book he did, which fed into the 1619 New York Times article, is probably the most controversial and probably the one that the left has been the most critical of. In fact, our friend Garrido and Eddie are strongly opposed to the position he took. But isn't it curious? All these incredible books he's written, which expose and explore themes that nobody else is writing about, get neglected and ignored. They don't get reviewed in the New York Times book review, New York Review of Books, even the London Review of Books, just ignored. And they're brilliant books. But that one book is the one that caught their imagination, the one that's the most, in my view, it's a little tricky. It's a little, I'm not sold on it.
Right.
But once again, it kind of shows the plight of Marxist academics. I mean, if they're like Zizek, if you're acclaimed as a Marxist, you're a shitbum Marxist, and he is a shitbum Marxist. And so you can go through the whole list. The further they are, the more prominent they are, the further they are from being authentic Marxist. And
who's that? He wrote an article about that with who was the guy that with the Vajek or the
Zizek.
That was
Yeah, I don't know how to pronounce it. Don't worry, I don't know how to pronounce it either.
that was that was
and I don't
quite
really
a
care.
that
It's
was
a total
quite a
friggin'
bitch
phony.
slapping article.
Well, I didn't. I mean, the guy Gabriel Rockhill. I'd love to get on here. I think you wrote to him. I wrote to him. He hasn't joined us, but he wrote really a very strong piece that on the guy and on the Frankfurt School and some other.
So let's talk about what fun we've had just reading interesting articles and then having people come on and talk about the article. We did a article on Moms for Liberty, number 55 with Walter Bragman. We did an article on The Big Lie with Anthony Conright, who was talking about the September, January 6th. We talked about Salon Investigative, The War on Public Schools, number 39 with Catherine Jones. These are the Proud Boys. We Are the Proud Boys with Andy Campbell. Those are fun. Those are fun. They write an article, they come on, they're all good.
They fall into my how the category, how the right did this or how the right did that. My criticism is they're virtually all journalists, which is nothing wrong with being a journalist. And they pretend to be neutral journalists, but they're a liberal journalist. That's fine. But when you get them, they've really written an article or they've made a living off of Rolling Stone or somebody who's sponsored them when they wrote articles. And they say, I've got enough now for a book, and they puff a book up. And they don't get you anywhere other than you click your tongue and say, look how horrible the Proud Boys are. Well, before the Proud Boys was the KKK, was the John Birch Society, and on and on and on and on. The right is nothing new to this country. Back to the know nothings. It's always a feature, and it always will be a feature when you have a kind of two-party system we have. They pull people out on the left, they pull people out on the right, and that's just the reality of it. So yeah, they're fun, but where do they take you, Pat? Where do they take you?
Oh, geez, you're such a grouchy old fart.
I
I like them. I thought that the Bragman's work on the Moms for Liberty was before anybody was talking about this. Now, of course, they're doing menage a trois. I mean, they're kind of in the news, and
well, yeah,
he's a good reporter. I subscribe to his blog. He did a new article just last week about all of these conservative monies being funneled into these investment portfolios, Vanguard, so forth, that are then specifically directed to certain causes for the right wing. And it's just a way of masking this huge amount of money, great investigative reporting. I don't know.
well, I mean, we
give these guys, these guys are trying.
We had Suzanne Gordon on about the VA.
Yes.
Well, it was reportage. It was reportage. This is what's going on at the VA. What I appreciated about it was a bit of an expose. No one's listening to that. Everyone wants to believe the VA is terrible. It doesn't function. It's no good. It's not giving vets their due. That's why we need, what's that crazy fundraising veterans group with the country and western singer with the big gravelly voice. Get yourself. The VA is an incredible healthcare system that's being suffocated, being strangled. And she talked about that, and no one else is. So I was happy to have reportage there because it's something but everybody knows about. The right-wing millionaires send their money and direct it in a certain way.
Right.
They did that. The Coors Beer Company was one of the foundational corporate funders of the right wing for 50 years ago, 60 years ago, et cetera, et cetera. That's not new. And the liberals have theirs. They have the George Soros and they have the other. So this is capitalism. So show me something new. I mean, don't just tell me something I already know.
Well, you're proving your point. I didn't know anything about Susan Gordon. I thought the VA was bad, bureaucratic, problematic, and I completely changed my mind after reading her book. And I have so much passion for my friends that have gone through the Vietnam War that are still to this day, many suffering. And the fact that they all get good care at the VA. And that brings me to friend of our show, Bill Ehrhart, who has spent his life fighting for veterans, fighting for support for his brothers. He was a Marine, went into Vietnam at 17, exposed to a lot of horrible things, and is the prominent American poet on veterans and on trauma of war.
Well, you know what I appreciate about him is that he's pointing people to the evils of war.
Right.
I mean, Smedley Butler is his idol. I mean, he idolizes.
Right. War is a Racket, number 49. He
deserves to be idolized. I mean, that's kind of character. Here's a guy that won 2 Congressional Medals of Honor. One of, I think, 2 or 3 people that have done that. One, it's a shaky one, but he legitimately won it. And he was a Marine, and he says, I was basically, a dupe for the State Department, for U.S. foreign policy, to go and put down rebellions in different places. And he had such great esteem, and this is Butler. And I think this sort of spills over into our friend. I mean, he's kind of a surrogate for him and his cause. His poetry, his work, his discussion is an expression of what Smedley Butler, he thinks, and I think he's right, Smedley Butler would be saying today. And that's why I appreciate him.
Yeah, he's unreal. Hey, we need to just hit a couple more. We can't go. I'm looking through our list, and God, so many good people that we've had on. Probably one that I was so excited about having them on was Norm Finkelstein. He was talking about burn that bridge when we get to it, which was the kind of an extension of beating up on Kindy and D'Angelo and all of that sort of idiocy. Man, was he was fun. We got probably 7,000-8,000 hits from his podcast. Soon as the book comes out, then Gaza happens.
Yeah.
And he is our leading academic on Gaza, and he slowly is being drawn into the public because of his opinion about Gaza. And it overshadowed his book. Now he's on all the media and is the reasonable voice of Gaza. Just tell me how cool Norman Finkelstein is.
He's the best. He was blacklisted. I mean, he was a person, he wrote a book, I don't know, 10, 15, 20. I still have a copy of it from that era about Israel and about what it is, the kind of apartheid state that it is, expose of it. And he was a thorn because his parents' history in the Holocaust. I mean, his family were victimized by Auschwitz, I think, and maybe at Buchenwald. And so it was difficult to put him down because, he's either not Jewish, he is Jewish. He doesn't understand. Oh, he does understand. But he struggled along and he was ostracized and couldn't get speaking engagements and so on. And we caught him on the rebound early on. Now he's rebounded enormously. He is the go-to person. If you want to talk about it, Scott, and in my image, having spent a lot of time in a university, having the opportunity to be an undergraduate and a graduate student, being around a lot of professors, some very good ones, that's my ideal of an academic. When he was on our show, he would quote Du Bois, he would quote Robeson, and it just spilled out. And everything is an argument. It's not just PRBS, it's an argument. And you have to follow the argument. You can't just sit there and say, oh, I like this guy, I like his personality. No, you got to follow the argument. It's there. Right. And just a terrific person. I'm so glad we had him on. We had a chance to have him on.
Yeah. The other guy,
I was reflecting on something before about you and I and our differences. And I think my main thing is ideas. I mean, I like the way ideas clash. I like the way ideas are brought forth. I like to see ideas that were buried come forward and so on. You're like personalities. I mean, you've enjoyed the people. I mean, you've enjoyed who they were and getting to know them.
Strongmen, Ruth Ben-Ghiat.
Yeah.
I love her. I like her, Greg.
Yeah.
I
think
follow
she's
her
bankrupt.
Zoom meetings. I
I
listened to
think she's
her.
bankrupt.
I just love her. And
Look at the
God, you
title,
ended up
Strongman.
almost, yeah, you
Strong.
yelled at her.
What ideological weight can you put on the concept of
Oh,
strongman?
Greg,
Now,
this,
either you don't know anything better than strongman to describe the world we live in, or you do that because you think we're all dumb and you've got to say
no, Greg, see,
strongman because we're
this is
not smart
perfect,
enough to.
perfect example. Uh, I think she's wonderful. She's doing great work. She's educating people. She's saying
What's she
these are the,
educating them about, other than anti-Trump? What is she
well,
educating them?
that we are, if you look at the world, and let's just kind of transition to where we are now. You sent me an article before we started, talking about how young people are going to vote for Trump because they're so pissed off. Trump is going to probably be our next president.
Looks that way.
And if that occurs, there are going to be changes. And that's what she studied. Mussolini, she studied all of these people that come in all over the world, and she
Don't tell me that.
lays
I've
out
studied
what's
them.
going to happen.
Man, I've studied him. That's what I resent. I've studied him. I didn't write books about it, but I've studied him. It's a superficial picture of who they were. Now, there's been many superficial pictures. They don't understand the essence of fascism. You know, it's the same thing as today. What you have to ask yourself is why in 1922, 23, in Italy, this new phenomena emerges. What is the Italian history? What's the history behind that in Italy? Italy was a young country. They still weren't pulling things together, and all the attempts to make a unified government were failing, leaving people out. There was anger everywhere. And so here's Mussolini, who's at a socialist party. He suddenly discovers there's a new way to go. I'm going to switch gears after World War II, after World War I, I'm going to switch gears and go. You know, there's that history. That's what you draw on, not superficial parallels. Well, you know, all the different fascist organizations were against free speech. Well, the friggin' Democrats are against free speech. They're making every effort today to
look at Matt
stop free
Taibbi.
speech. Yeah,
Matt
I mean,
Taibbi.
they're trying to kill him.
Yeah.
So, I mean, come on, don't give me superficiality and present it as though it's profound.
Well, you're wrong about that. Let's change the subject.
Can we talk about one person which I think you're assiduously avoiding, and I'd like to talk about him. And
Who's
that's
that?
Freddie Du Bois.
God,
Okay.
I love Freddie.
I know you do.
love Freddie.
And that you like the personality and you feel almost a fatherly thing towards him. The first thing he did
He's
did two
remarkable.
things. Two things he did. The first thing he did, I was really disappointed in and not angry about, because it
The
was
Cult of Smart. That was episode 22.
revisiting a notion that in the 60s and 70s came forward and was smashed by most of the left, in terms of suggesting that people have inherent abilities and they're limited by those abilities to certain categories. What Freddie wanted to do is say, well, there's nothing wrong with being a plumber. It should be, the job should be elevated. No, the idea, the notion that people are designated for these should be. But that's all I want to say. I was disappointed. The last time we had him on, I thought he was terrific.
That's how the elites in the social justice movement. Yeah.
He's one of the few people that dares to take on the NGOs, the nonprofits. These are a scourge on our politics. They're the people that are planting, are really essentially seeding, planting, and nourishing these ideas that we're all told we have to accept, that are part of the way the world is today. And they're given to us, and we're expected to, and Freddie did a nice job in his discussion of really chopping that up and attacking. He's not afraid of it. So my estimation of Freddie is entirely different today, and I want to make that clear. I really enjoyed.
Well, I don't think you kind of got his original argument. And when he did that 2 years earlier, he was living in a little 900 square foot, 600 square foot place in Brooklyn, and just
personality. Has nothing to do with anything. But anyway, you like personalities.
Okay.
I like
all right.
ideas.
So anyway, his radical thought was that children have varying academic, intellectual, and capabilities, and that we never refuse to acknowledge that, because that's a horrible thing to say. And that not everyone should be going to college. Not everyone should be, and I agree with it.
Look. Now that's wrong. That's wrong, because what you should be saying is that everybody should be given a chance to develop whatever capabilities they have there,
I
and not
agree.
presume that they're going to be different. Presume that they're going to fall along a, what do you call that curve? The
Bell-shaped.
Bell-shaped curve. Don't presume that. Let people develop their capabilities, which means that you have to go to this kind of society we live in and fix it before you make those judgments. But I don't want to, I'm so excited about the new Freddie de Boer that I don't want to go back to that. I think he's wrong, and that's okay. You know,
Okay,
people
I want to
wrong.
talk about something. Let's talk about Gaza and our conflict there. In a Foreign Affairs Today, or no, the 14th, so a couple days ago, they did how Israel, Hamas, the war in Gaza is changing Arab views. And they did a huge survey with people in Tanzania, which is sort of the heartbeat of what the Arabs think about situation. Before the October 7th, U.S. had a popularity of 40%. After October 7th, it went down to 10%. Before, Biden was 29%. After, 6%. Today, China has a favorable opinion of 75% in this study, and Russia 53%. So we really screwed the pooch by showing images after images of genocide occurring right now. And then when you look at the CNN, they have a common theme that, well, we were going to have a two-state solution, but the the Palestinians just kept turning it down. Or we would want to negotiate, but there's no one to negotiate with. We really want a two-state solution, but we just, they're incapable of negotiating for that. And then people don't believe their lying eyes that we're watching a genocide occur right now with mass starvation, more bombs dropped than the 2 atomic bombs, and we're turning the whole Arab world against us, probably now more so than we ever have. I don't know. What do you think? How bad is it?
Yeah, it's that bad and worse. But I gotta say, I kind of blame the American liberals for this, because at the same time they were harping on a wall. There's a wall built between. We're going to build the Trumpites want to build a wall between Mexico and the U.S. There's a wall in Israel. There's a wall that Palestinians had to walk through. They had to walk through to go to their jobs and to walk back through these checkpoints on this wall. It's a massive wall. They pretended they didn't know about that. They didn't know about it. It's their own fault. They pretended they didn't know about the West Bank and the settlers that were encroaching, destroying villages, walking in, shooting people for just to get them out of there so they could take over that village and put their own settlement up. And Obama was aware of it. Obama said, you got to stop doing it, but he didn't enforce it. He didn't do anything about it. So, this is all going on forever. And then suddenly the 7th, Hamas, which, I don't have any truck with. I mean, they're a theological, bizarre kind of organization, but that's what the Palestinians have there. That's all they're allowed. They go and attack. So who would be surprised? Why was anyone surprised? And then, but what's surprising is the retaliation. My God, it's just awful. Just
Unreal.
Awful, relentless. Unreal. And people, and it's getting through because the major media, which will go soft in the articles, are posting pictures. Those pictures are working the way they've always worked, sometimes to the detriment of reality, but they're posting a picture of someone carrying a child who's dead and dust covered. They didn't get dust covered because they had the flu. they're dust covered because a bomb blew up. And
Oh,
it's
but don't
reaching
you know that they notify everybody 2 hours before with a little
yeah,
explosion?
yeah.
Don't you know they call people and text them, we're going to be bombing you? And, you know, this is the thing that bothers me the most is if you look at Israel, it has places that are equivalent to Manhattan. I mean, it has a tech sector, academic sector, Tel Aviv, liberal, remarkable. Then, of course, you've got the crazy settlers in the West Bank that are, you know, kind of religious nuts. And then you have this horrible, distorted right-wing government now. But it's an eclectic group of people. When asked the question, do you think that we are bombing too much? It was like only 12% of the population of Israel said, yeah, we're bombing too much. You know,
Yeah.
and at that point in time, I'm just going, I don't know what to do. I don't know. Just amazing. And that's, you know, so there you go.
Well,
That's
no,
bad.
but it's like a process in this country. It's a process, and they've got there from the idealism. I mean, give credit where credit's due. After World War II, there was an idealism. There was an idealism of going to a kibbutz, setting up a village, having socialist principles, et cetera, et cetera. At the same time, there was a right-wing element among the Israelis, that was left over from Yablinsky, whatever his name, not Yablinsky, and the Ergon, the terrorists that were in the Israeli movements at times. So you had these same tensions. And that idealism remained as a factor in Israel society. The Israelis' Labor Party was strong and so forth. But over time, this crazy theocratic right-wingers took over. And people let it happen until now we have a situation where Israel as a country is conducting just as we've conducted in Vietnam. If you would ask Americans, US citizens in 1963 and 64 in a survey, only 12% would say what we're doing in Vietnam was wrong.
Right.
So
You're
why
right.
are why be shocked about
Right.
Israelis?
Right. You're right.
We got to that point with the Cold War, with all the anti-communism. Oh, they're going to take over all of East Asia.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's history.
Hey,
But we
listen,
got to stop.
we've been going on, and I want to mention one thing before we go, and that is your writing. You write in MLK,
ML
Marxist
today.
Leninist Today, and it's also posted on your blog. I counted that you did about 21 blogs last year.
Uh,
Uh, and it's one of the best emails I get is when your new blog came out. You on December 11th had one called "The Age of Hypocrisy: Liberalism and Its Discontents," which is, in a way, a summary of a
yeah,
lot about what we're talking about
it's the same
now.
drum.
That,
I beat that drum a lot. Yeah, I do beat that drum a lot.
right, and our ludicrous war on terrorism, our the problems of privacy, the dysfunctional democracies, not things not being democratic, um, Matt Taibbi and Greenwald being demonized by the left. Or
Well, the only
they're,
liberals left. There's a
know,
handful of them, not just those two, but there's a handful of liberals in this country left. Everybody else is in a tribe.
right,
Pick your tribe, and hey, I have friends that when they bring up Trump, they would say things that appall me. They'd say, I could see someone assassinating him. I could see we should outlaw him. We should put him in jail. Don't you think he should have due process? Hell, I'm a red. I'm not sold on bourgeois democracy, but I believe people should have due process. But that's where the tribalism is taken over on
right.
both sides, all sides.
Well,
Yeah,
I'm
it's
going to
great.
link to your blogs. They're just so many of these are good. You did a great review on Finkelstein. You took apart Angela White Fragility before it was way
Yeah,
back when.
I was early on that, and on your buddy, the senator from Ohio. What's his name? The senator from Ohio that did Hillbilly Elegy.
Oh yeah, JD Vance.
Yeah, I
So
was there.
anyway, I
Yeah,
just, when you write these, how long does it take you to do one of your essays?
it's hard work. It really is hard work. I mean, life gets in the way, but I because of her.
Yeah, you talked about the climate crises, affirmative action. Anyway, they're always interesting. I usually agree with you, and yeah, a lot of work goes into that. You can tell it's well researched, and you're
Well, I'm
writing
retired now. Like you, I'm
huh?
retired. So I'm retired. So I don't play golf. I don't do any of the things that most people do. So I got time to write and read. And like you, I love to read. I mean, I'm
Yeah,
jealous of my time to read. It's a passion.
I know. Just a good book. Just I'm now forcing myself to read um, fiction. I just finished the new Michael Cunningham book, who won the Pulitzer for The Hours, which is just remarkable. Because otherwise, my mind is just constantly, doing politics, and that's not good for
Yeah.
me. So, hey, let's quit.
Okay.
This has been fun.
It has been
Our
fun.
next podcast is with a psychiatrist who specializes in trauma.
Uh-huh.
Christopher Hedges says that she is one of the most prominent psychiatrists since Freud. And I'm
Wow.
really looking forward to
That's
that
gonna be
one.
exciting. Yeah, that'll be really and that's
That'll
in
be
January. That's
that's in January, and then
January.
so you're going to be traveling, going back, taking your sister back to Illinois, and I'm going to be
Yeah, I'll be the
going
rest
to a
of the year.
wedding. My son's getting married in Columbia, and so I've got to get
Oh,
ready
that's
for
right.
that.
When is that? When is that, Pat?
1st of February,
Oh,
or in February.
that's when I have my knee surgery, so it's perfect timing. We'll
I
both
know.
be in.
So we'll probably be disjointed here, back and forth, and then we'll get back on the saddle and go
Right,
from there.
right,
So,
right. Good.
hey,
Well,
been fun.
good, great. All right. Clap
Hey,
your hands. Be done so we can talk for a minute.
all right.